Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Dare to Care, where we actually dare to care for more than just ourselves. My name is Masha, I'm a veterinarian and a nurse, and also the host of this podcast, and always on the lookout for new people who are passionate about animal welfare. And today I have Agnieszka with me, an expert about bear welfare, a topic that I haven't really thought about for a really long time. It's not a species that I encounter very often. It's also definitely not a species that I had learned something about during my vet study. So I'm really looking forward to learn a lot by talking to you. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone, and good evening, Masha. It's really nice to be here.
Thank you for taking the time. You're from Poland. You're a Polish researcher. But not only that, so maybe you can give us some background about yourself. What have you studied? Where have you worked already? What are the research topics maybe that you're currently dealing with? Just, introduce yourself.
Okay, so my full name is Agnieszka Sergiel, and I'm a biologist, not a veterinarian. But I really enjoy working with veterinarians, actually. Because I also think that working on welfare issues, this is really an important part of it, health. So I believe that we should collaborate and integrate even more. So I really enjoy working with vets. But speaking a little bit more about what I do, I'm indeed scientist. I work on various issues related to bears. At some point, it was only concerning captive bears and their welfare and behavioral problems. So I did my PhD on stereotypic behavior and also physiological symptoms of stress in zoo bears. And then later on, I expanded a little bit into stress physiology, but that would include also free-ranging bears. So I did some studies, and I still do. We monitor stress levels in various populations in Europe, but also beyond. So this is one of my research focuses, stress itself, but I'm also quite interested in animal cognition, behavioral problems, but also chemical communication, which with bears it's especially fun to delve into. But in any case, it's really mostly bears, and it has been like that since 2002. But if we talk a little bit more, then you will probably see they are fascinating, and you have never enough of them. They teach you every day. So bears.
But I'm wondering, as a biologist, you learn also a lot about plants, as far as I know, and also not only about bears. So I'm wondering, at what point did suddenly this topic came up for you?
So this was pretty early on. For my bachelor thesis, I was working with literature related to abnormal behavior. And then I somehow decided that for masters, I would like to continue and go a little bit deeper. And as masters are mostly for biologists, you have to do some experiments, some research yourself, design, conduct, analyze, and write it up. So I decided that I will go for some observations, that I will go for behavioral study in big zoo mammals. So because the only zoo that I could reach at that point with really basic funds was the zoo in Wrocław, the city that I was studying. So we went for that, and there was elephant, there were bears, 4 different species, and there were also big cats, lions, and tigers. And there I met Andean bears, or also in other words called spectacled bears, because of their pattern around the eyes, like spectacled. And I fell in love, simply. And then when we were discussing what will happen with me after my master's, then my supervisor was trying to push me towards elephants, and I really liked, and I thought that I'm going to work with elephants. But then we discovered how much funding it would eat, and we really did not have that much. So then I said that those can be only bears, if not elephants, or nothing, or I just go away. So I stayed with bears, and my PhD was on stereotypic behaviors. And I also analyzed the feces of all those bears for fecal cortisol metabolites. So we were somehow trying to merge the intensity of stereotyping behavior and relate it to the stress levels that we could read from feces. So this is how it all started. So it was meant to be, maybe. I don't know, but they were special. And if you get to know them a little bit more, then you just want more. At least this was how it went for me. And I still want more.
Yeah, that's even greater. Like, that's all the best when even after years, you're not fed up with it, but there is still this passion for this one species. This is great to hear, actually. Yeah, it's lovely. When I hear stress and when I hear stereotypical behavior, I immediately think of also animal welfare as like a buzzword. How would you describe the relationship between your work and animal welfare or bear welfare in that context?
So, this is a complex issue, but yes, stereotypic behavior is a measure of welfare, and it usually indicates poor welfare. So I want to believe that if we study and describe and analyze the relations and see what might be the problem, that then we should change the reality. And I see that this is actually happening a lot. So if we would mention, there are even organizations working specifically on bear welfare and trying to enhance and educate. And I know one, and at least one, that is really focusing on education and teaching the others and promote exchange of experiences. I'm a part of this organization as well. And this is Bear Care Group, that is really organizing conferences and really focuses on people professionally taking care of bears to make their life better, to know more. And to know more is the part where we start the change. So I believe that it's really still important. And the fact that this knowledge is growing is really making a change when we can apply what we know, and we know more and more, and we can do more and more, and we can really, make life-changing changes in the environment of bears that we keep in captivity. But we can also provide some conclusions related to free-ranging bears, and we can also recognize that the human pressure has its toll on them, and we can think of the ways to minimize it. Because from the welfare point of view, what is one of the important, crucial things is not to let them to suffer unnecessarily. And this happens in captivity, as we can imagine, in many ways. But this also happens to the ones that are in the wild. And this is what we should take care of as well. So we are recognizing, and I do that too. And how it often happens, we stumble upon some situation or we observe something, and we can say things and change things, provide. We can relocate bears, we can rescue. Those are all the efforts that are really happening all over the world, and many organizations are engaged. So Bear Care Group is focused on teaching and promoting behavior-based enrichment, behavior-based husbandry, really or I can say also we really try to teach people that bears should be provided with all what they need species specifically. So it should be all according to what they evolved to, and how they are. So they need all to satisfy what are their biological and psychological needs as species. They are 8 species of them, and they are a little bit different. They differ with foraging, they differ with movements and size and breeding and seasonality. So this is all. But there are also organizations that focus on the bears that really suffer and need rescue. So there is Bears in Mind in Netherlands that I also like to collaborate with. And we sometimes rescue bears together, but they do quite a bit of work also on education and rescues. And there is a sanctuary that they take care of. And there is German organization Foundation for Bears that is also rescuing bears, including bears from Ukraine, as Bears in Mind does too. There is Four Paws, also international organization that is also working to do a lot. And some of those organizations really focus on bears or do bears as a big part of their competence. So this is also what I would like to acknowledge, that, there is a lot of work going on bear welfare, and there is still more what is needed. Sometimes those welfare problems are regionally specific. So, for example, in Asia, there is Animals Asia, who is rescuing bears from biofarms. And same is partly Free the Bears, that is rescuing bears in Vietnam, but not only. So there is plenty of people engaged into helping bears.
Yeah, that's a really good example. Not only one example, but like you gave a lot of different examples that many people are already involved. So if someone is interested in bear welfare, you can find so many opportunities, people who are already working in that field, and that you can learn from them. So yeah, it's good that you mentioned like a bunch of them. So whoever is inspired now, you can go into your own research, open Google, or whatever like search engine, and then you will find, I think, a lot of information, even more than we are discussing today. But from the things that you've mentioned, because you said that like welfare for bears in captivity is definitely different compared to like for bears who still live in the wilderness. Can you give us maybe like some examples that makes it very obvious for us how it differs? So how would you describe the most crucial points of animal welfare for your bears in captivity, and what are maybe things that are not that obvious for most of the people, probably for bears who still live outside there somewhere?
This is another pretty complex question, but how I would like to differentiate and how I would like to start is that we approach welfare the same. Good welfare is for every bear, free or in captivity. This is the stage, the status when he or she can live as he or she needs, and that he or she has everything what is needed for a good life. And we can imagine this is simple in captivity. They cannot roam freely, and they like to move a lot, and they move across quite vast habitats, and they can walk quite far. We had an example of collared bear in Poland that visited 5 countries and went from Poland through Slovakia to Hungary, and then back to Slovakia and Poland, and went to Romania and Ukraine. So it can be a long walk. So we can imagine that if the bear in captivity meets the fence, there might be some issue right there. But we try to do everything and try to furnish its environment try to enrich it in a way that it's not that much of an issue, that the bear has all kinds of mental stimulation or all kinds of care provided so it doesn't suffer behaviorally, physically. But in the wild, as we can imagine, there is in some populations, and I'm not sure if there is, I don't think if there is any population that is really free of human pressure, but we take habitats, we fragment them, and there is an issue that they cannot walk where they want to walk. However, I always like to focus on the fact that they should not, and I mentioned it already, they should not suffer unnecessarily. So we should do everything that it doesn't happen. So when we even do research, and then we have to capture bears for collaring, and we have to intervene, this is also the point where we should do everything that there is no unnecessary suffering. So we should apply high standards, and we should apply the same approach, I would say, that they don't suffer unnecessarily. So this becomes, when comparing free roaming animals to captive ones, bears, this is the focal point, I would say. And because they can suffer physically, mentally, this is where we should put our efforts.
It might be a very provocative question, but some people argue that wild animals are sometimes in better care in human captivity or in human care, because then they have access to vet health services, for example, and they are under control. So also in a sense of humans can provide the proper food, so the wild animals don't have to hunt, they don't get hurt, maybe they don't get, it's not as cold as maybe outside when there's the winter coming or any other weather events. How would you react to this kind of statement? If someone would tell you, you know what, I believe that an animal in captivity, a wild animal, is actually in better shape and better care and has therefore maybe a better life compared to one who is still living a free life.
So I am often told something like this. I remember even some conferences where people from different fields were also discussing this, what is worse. So my response to that is usually that they evolved to have all those natural events happening to them. So to me, this is the best life possible. But because there are situations in which they have to be under human care, then in my eyes, it's more challenging. Under human care, they also live longer. And then they experience the aging issues that they don't experience in the wild, for example. So bears in the wild, they live around 30 years. And then in captivity, they can live up to 50. And they experience all kinds of issues that we can imagine related to age, including cognitive declines, including mobility issues that are as painful as we can imagine sometimes. And those are also experiences for which the veterinary care cannot help much. There are types of pains that there is no medicine that can alleviate them. So this is my answer, short.
Now, I really love that aspect about aging, because I think that is something, it's so true, and I think it's very, very often forgotten, or you don't think about it, because for us humans it's so it seems so natural and so normal that at some point we age, and what has to go with aging is kind of suffering, actually. I don't know, getting bored, or you also lose loved ones, you have arthritis and all this stuff that you that you don't want to have. It's a really interesting point of view to say, well, this is something that in the wilderness you might not have because it's just like over for you. A really interesting thought.
So, as we can imagine, there is many of those experiences related to aging that we can a little bit feel for, so we can recognize and relate to them. But of course, it doesn't mean that there is nothing bad or no diseases happening to bears in the wild. There are, but I would say that those diseases, they have also their own ecology. So this is how it all functions. So those diseases, they limit the numbers. Of course, sometimes because of some other problems in the ecosystem, they go as natural disasters a little bit more than we would wish to see. There are tremendous infections sometimes that are pretty massive, and there are massive die-offs that we also don't like to see. But there are also cases that I find really, really interesting. Also, we can imagine also how problematic they are for the certain individuals that suffer them. But we do find cancer in wild bears. We do find, for example, polycystic ovaries syndrome in females. We find gastritis, so stomach problems in wild bears. So we find all kinds of diseases as well. But as we already mentioned, it's usually the end for them or lifetime trouble, and they are not then as fit as they would be 100%. Yeah. So there are consequences for them too. But as I mentioned already, I look at this all apart from the facts how we intervene in the nature and how we exploit too much. I see it all as natural, and this is good life to be, and this is how they evolved with what they evolved with to be exposed to.
Yeah, it's kind of part of the ecosystem, right?
Yeah. And it's a network. There are relations, so it's not that there is something unnecessary there. We usually are unnecessary part, and usually we cause unnecessary suffering.
Mm. A few minutes ago, you mentioned, besides some organizations, you also mentioned groups or organizations that do rescue work and that rescue bears. In what kind of situation does a bear need to be rescued from? Could you give us a few examples, and then how does the facility for this kind of bear looks like once it has reached this rescue center?
So the problems in captivity or human-created problems for them that we see them at are, as I mentioned, in Asiatic countries. In some, there is still biofarming going on. In some parts, it's already prohibited, but still those bears, they have to be rehomed somewhere, and they are really in a tremendous suffering. So if someone is interested, I would and can stand those views, horrific sometimes, or most of the times actually. They can see from what conditions Animals Asia is rescuing bears. And of course, to rehabilitate bears that are suffering from many veterinary problems or medical problems, and then they need veterinary care, the spectrum of those problems is really wide, and they are rehomed to the sanctuaries. And the sanctuary by default is a place where they can find peace and they can start live like bears should live. There are different standards in different sanctuaries, but then there are all kinds of challenges with grouping, with behavioral rehabilitation also. Some of those bears, they tend to also have mental problems that need to be attended to. Physical suffering needs to be alleviated. those are all kinds of issues post bile farming. So there are also cancers, there are chronic inflammations, there are ophthalmological problems, dental problems are a big issue in those bears that are on a poor diet. They try to help themselves with bar biting, so they tend to also break their teeth biting the cages. Currently, the issue is also the war. So Russian aggression on Ukraine, and then animals needing rescue from the war zone. So this is also happening, and there is quite a few of bears evacuated from Ukraine, and they are relocated in different countries in Europe. There is a group that is helping to find free spaces and placements for those bears. There are big sanctuaries that are aiming at rescuing bears from private hands. So those examples are, for example, bears used as an attraction next to restaurant to attract some more clients to the place. And usually those are also kept in pretty poor condition. We can imagine that it's not that cheap to provide the bear with proper environment. And those places next to restaurant are usually pretty tiny cages or really tiny enclosures, flat, with nothing provided. And those bears are mostly fed with leftovers from human food. This is another problem. A big issue was also once dancing bears. So walking with bears that were having rings in nose and in their lips, and then they were tortured to dance to the music. So in some countries there was a ban imposed for those practices, and then all the bears were rescued at once. And this happened, for example, in Bulgaria. And those dancing bears ended up in the sanctuary created especially for them, where they could feel the grass under their feet, where they could climb trees, they could swim in the swimming pools, and they could live as bears should. Another issue would be also sometimes, private hands, not only restaurants, but also some kind of private parks, or someone would have a bear as a pet, and this would be also imposing quite a bit of issues in terms of keeping conditions. So those problems, they are, I would say, regionally specific sometimes, but sometimes, as in countries like, for example, in Poland, it would be simply also like really low standards of keeping what would be the problem. So when we were doing the study, nation or countrywide study, we were visiting all the bears kept in Poland for 3 years. We wanted to do also kind of inventory, because no one really knew what is the situation and what is the total number. So we found, for example, bears in dog shelter, that they were kept there, given into the deposit to the animal shelter owner, because the zoo had no proper space, and the owner of the shelter made like concrete cages for them that were a little bit bigger than at the zoo. And then it was supposed to be just the temporary solution. The bears were confiscated from one former circus person who was traveling with those bears from Russia to Poland. So the zoo somehow was decided to be the place where those confiscated bears would end up. And then there was an agreement made with a dog shelter, animal shelter owner or manager. And the temporary thing was unfortunately very prolonged, and those bears spent there like 10 years. So this also had to be solved urgently. And we also found bears in really tiny cages in some so-called mini zoos that were managed by like city greenery. So they were in a way municipal institutions, but like really poor ones. So the bears were in the cages on concrete, like 35 square meters. So this is what we happened to experience and see. And we were surprised, I have to say. The problem was first for Poland to end private keeping, but then also really to raise standards, because in some zoos bears were kept on concrete and really in cages, not in enclosures that were really poorly furnished. So they were not provided any opportunity, any choice on activities. Like they had nothing to do. So we also observed bears at that time that were self-mutilating. Even in the countries that we would think that those problems don't exist, then we might be surprised. Yeah, on one hand, some low standards of keeping. On the other hand, really torturing bears for some traditional ideas, medicine, or as those dancing bears that is luckily really finished now for some benefits based on their suffering.
Yeah, maybe for the listeners, there's like some context for two things here. So one is the bear bile farming. That's something that is mainly happening in Asia, or like in East Asia, because there is this demand for traditional medicine, and that is produced by the bile of bears. So you need to keep them in captivity to have access to that, to like puncture
and drain the gallbladder.
Puncture and drain then the gallbladder. So that's something that is happening. And as you can think or imagine, there are several issues that go in hand with that. And the other thing that you mentioned is like these dancing bears. I once read an article about how this is done. Like how do you teach a bear but actually torture it as a really young cub, like only a few weeks or months old. You take these baby bears and then you play a music, and while you play the music, you usually put them on a really hot surface, so that they then start what we could say or call dancing, but they actually just like try to like get away from that heat, avoid the really hot surface. So that's how they then associate the music with this kind of behavior. So like standing on two legs and dance. So this is how they are being taught, which is a form of torture. I would also agree with that. Just so that the listeners have an idea what we actually mean and what we are talking about.
Yeah.
Now, I would like to like shift a bit more to the positive, because I was wondering, we have mentioned now all these kind of horrible stories, how it should not be done and how bears should not be kept. If you could describe maybe like the perfect enclosure of bears in captivity, how would it look like?
So we would like to, or we should pick a species for which it should be done, because it should be species specific. I don't like to say any minimum numbers of square meters or square kilometers. It should be as much space as possible. But space is also not everything. The space should be prepared specifically, and the space should be complex. There should be natural soil, there should be vegetation, there should be trees or climbing structure for brown bear as well. Some people like to think that they don't climb when they are adult bears, but they do. I've seen it. So they really do. They should have trees to rub against, to explore, to bite the bark off, to scratch, make claw marks, bite branches, eat fresh leaves, and do this kind of things. They should have opportunity to express all comfort behaviors. So if they want to rub against ground, if they want to dig a little bit of depression and then cool themselves like this. They should have shade. They should have swimming pool or other natural part of river or part of some stream. They should be provided with the opportunities to work for their food. They should be able to forage and search it. They shouldn't be provided food at once in one plate or in one spot and then consume and then what to do. They spend most of their active time in the wild searching for food, and we should give them the opportunity to do so in captivity. It should be the space in which they would be able to express their seasonal behavior. So brown bear is hibernating species, so they should be provided the opportunity. They should be fed according to their caloric changing needs, because they are highly seasonal animal, and those seasons are also marked by the food intake. So after they exit the den, then they are in hypophagia, so they don't eat that much. Then they go through breeding season, in which they are focused on mating and breeding. And then after the breeding season, they go into hyperphagia, so they eat as much as they can to store fat tissue to be able to den properly in another denning season. So those are really marked seasonal changes physiologically and behaviorally that happen to them, and they should have the opportunities. They should have all kinds of mental, behavioral enrichment. So they should be able to play, search, have their time occupied with those activities in all kinds of dimensions. But I would also say that it should be the space that is provided with choices, so they can really control what is happening during the day. So they should have a choice what they want to do at a certain moment, and we should go around this schedule according to their species specific needs. So in terms of brown bears that are in the wild, they are crepuscular, so they are most active early in the morning and then a little bit later in the day when it's darkening. So they should be able to follow this natural daily rhythm, but also seasonally and annually. They should have choice.
So you've mentioned a few of these 8 bear species we have. One species that, at least in Germany, we will find in quite a lot of zoos, I would say, is the polar bear. That is definitely not from that kind of climate zone.
Yes.
It's from a very different climate zone. From your perspective, what would you let us know, of keeping, as a zoo, of keeping a polar bear in a very different climate zone? How is that even possible? From a welfare perspective, and if it's possible, like how can we ensure that her or his needs are actually then acknowledged and fulfilled in that kind of context?
So it is a species that it's in those terms quite controversial. So there is still a debate if this is the species that should be even kept in captivity, not in its own climate zone. But it is happening. And if it is happening, then the obligation of those institutions is really to provide them with comfort. They need also climatic comfort. So I don't say that bears, they need to live on the snow. Polar bears, they can live on the grass, but they should be able to control their temperature and cool down when it's too hot for them. So they should be provided with such. They should be provided with cooling zones if they choose to cool themselves. So I've seen polar bears that are kept in Scotland, for example, that have like really large enclosure. There is grass, there are hills, there are trees, there is a big pond for them. Of course, if it's too hot, they are also provided snow, frozen fruits and vegetables in a type of kind of ice cream that is fruits and vegetables immersed in water, then frozen, and then they are, or sometimes also fish and meat frozen as well together with all of this. And then they are provided with such an ice cream, and then they can play a bit and take this all out as they wish. So I've seen them. They were not white, but I believe that their welfare was good at that place. So I see very good examples, but I see also very bad examples, and we saw those examples also in Poland. Luckily, the bears were translocated by the decision of program coordinator, and they were relocated to another zoo because they were living on the concrete. They had no choice about the temperature they are in, and it was really terrible and poor suffering. They were mostly clean, much cleaner than the polar bears that I saw in Scotland, but definitely poor. While the bears in Scotland I saw were really doing good. So this is what I say, because I also my tendency, private opinion, or private as a biologist, as a person working with them, I don't like to see them not in their own climatic zone for their comfort. So this discussion that is ongoing, it has a point. So I agree with that. It's often controversial because they are kept in such a poor standards often that is really not meeting their needs and not allowing them for comfort.
Maybe coming back to like these sanctuaries that we've talked about, because they have been in captivity usually for quite some time, then they are being rescued, get some specific care in those sanctuaries. Is it then even possible to bring them back into freedom, whatever we can, if we even can call that freedom, I don't know, into wilderness? Is it possible to rehabilitate these bears and make them, or prepare them for being a free bear again?
So if it takes years in captivity, not anymore. But there are rehabilitation efforts that are mostly applied to orphaned bears that then would spend in captivity a few months, or some young adult bears that would spend in captivity just weeks, or some sub-adult bears that would be rescued from some snares, for example, poachers' snares, and then their wounds would be attended to, secured, and then they would be released, and then they would again spend just some days or weeks in captivity, and then they could be released. Also, it's also complex issue, and here I would also like to note that in general, all what we are talking about takes conferences and workshops and days of discussions, and rehabilitation is also one of those issues that warrants conferences going on every now and then about the experiences. Rehabilitation is challenging. For some biologists, is also controversial. There are differences from country to country how to rehabilitate bears in terms of what if rehabilitation is unsuccessful, and we know it only post-release when the bear is coming back to a human proximity and search for food close to humans. So what we do later. There are also countries in which the habitat is so fragmented that there is really no that safe space to release bear to, that wouldn't cause the problems. The important issue with rehabilitation is also to monitor the bears we release from after some stay in captivity. There is also behavioral persistence that is sometimes discussed also as something against rehabilitation, that they learn really quickly and they are pretty persist in their behaviors. So if they develop stereotypic behavior during even short time spent in captivity, then some would argue that it might not be suitable anymore to release such a bear. Yeah, it is challenging. It's also challenging to minimize human contact and association of humans with food provided. So, but there is plenty of guidelines also and techniques and almost textbooks, and people share their experiences how to feed depending on the age that the bear is placed in temporal captivity. But I see also important that we realize that it cannot be everywhere the same, that we rehabilitate and release every bear. And the question is also what we do if we are prepared as a country, if we have emergency teams, because we need to be ready if something is unsuccessful. And we also need to have on mind what is the local situation, because sometimes local people would not accept such attempts. There are regions in which people don't like bears, so their rehabilitation efforts wouldn't be accepted.
Yeah, that's also a good remark. Releasing a bear somewhere needs to, you need to consider also the human population and their beliefs sometimes, actually. I still remember, it's quite a few years ago, that there was this one bear roaming around and wandering around in the Alps, and people were really afraid. I think Bruno, I'm not really sure.
And he was killed at the end.
Yeah, I was killed in the end. And that was something that was going on for weeks, and you read about it in the news. And it was not interesting, but it was, I think, that was one of the events where you actually could see in the news how the mindset of people and their approach to that bear shifted and changed. Which was absolutely relevant and had a big impact, I believe, on also decisions that were made. So yeah, that's something that you also need to consider.
Yeah, and also like location, not only like local attitudes, but also to choose the location in which you don't interfere too much with the local population and local density of bears, and that you also choose the location for the bear to be successful, to really survive, and really not to come back. So, and not step into troubles. Of course, it cannot be always avoided, and it cannot be always assigned to unsuccessful rehabilitation, because the bear could learn in the meantime something wrongly, because of the location, because of something what was happening there, of course. But it's complex, and it needs proper decisions and considerations made for the bear to be successful, for people to be happy, and for it not to cause more troubles.
Okay, we have talked already for an hour. So again, like always, now is the final chance for you to let us know, or tell us something very unique, maybe give us a hint or a tip, answer something that I haven't asked so far. So is there anything that you would tell the audience, the veterinarians and the non-veterinarians? Yeah, so here is the floor for you now.
Okay. So what we haven't touched upon yet probably would be many things.
Yes.
But for the future veterinarians, I would say that bears are also medically really fascinating because of their physiology that is really highly seasonal, because of their hibernation, in which they sleep for a few months and they don't suffer from sore wounds. I'm not sure how it's called in English properly, but I mean those wounds that are created because of the laying position for extended amount of times. Is it the cubitus?
At least in German we call it the same.
Okay.
The cubitus.
So maybe this would be the word, but they don't suffer from it. They can decrease the kidney function to just 1000% and then still function. They don't urinate, they don't defecate. They are metabolic magicians at that time. And this is really inspiring also for human medicine. So I've been once on very fascinating conference, and this was the conference that served to exchange experiences between human doctors and animal doctors. And this was like animal-inspired human medicine and human-inspired animal medicine. There are amazing vets out there that save the sight of animals. There is a British veterinarian, Claudia Hartley. I hope that I pronounce and remember her name and the last name very well, that is helping bears to see again. A famous ophthalmologist who operates on the eyes of the bears. There is amazing veterinarian Romain Pizzi that I would also like to mention here. He works in Scotland and he was recently saving bear brain from hydrocephalus and operating on a bear in a zoo. There is Heather Bacon, amazing vet, and I'm really happy to be her colleague on the board of directors of Berker Group. And she does also amazing things, helping bears with mental problems and really, helping bear keepers to help their bears when they suffer from panic attacks or from extended fear or from anxiety, stereotypic behavior that also can be addressed if it's not like really brain issues, so organic, but really behavioral. So all of it needs attendance, and then there are people helping. So what I would like to mention is that from the point of view of a veterinarian, those are amazing species, amazing animals, and there is a lot going on that can, I believe, inspire the careers of future veterinarians. And behaviorally, they are also amazing. They communicate in amazing way. And this is fascinating, and we don't know still a lot of it. Of course, we will never know how they perceive the world of smells themselves, how it is for them, what they really experience. But we can observe really amazing things from how they communicate. They are solitary, let's say, but they have really social potential high. And we see in Captivity how they are making friends, how they make peace in groups, what complex personalities they have. They are really amazing animals. This is what I would like to emphasize.
No, I think you did a really great job in emphasizing this. You could really hear and feel your passion about these animals. It's amazing. Thank you very much for sharing this much.
You're welcome.
So by that speech, thank you very much for your time. I hope the listeners are as inspired as well. So thank you very much, and I wish you a good evening and also a good night, actually.
Thank you, Masha, and good night, everyone. Thank you for listening.
And it's over again. I hope you have learned something new or have been inspired.
If so, please share it with someone you know, and by that let's make the world together a little wiser. Take the time to give us 5 stars and a good review. If you would like to know more about today's topic, like always, you'll find a bunch of links in the description. If you have any questions, want to know more about the podcast, or have any other comments, just write an email at podcast.daretocare@gmail.com or DM me on Instagram at daretocare_podcast. Thanks for listening, and see you next time!